Hey everybody, Steven Totillo here with another video, a bit sooner than I planned to make one, but I woke up this morning to some Zelda news. Don't get too excited. This isn't news about a new Zelda. It was news about an old Zelda. And I thought, I know a little something about how that game was covered, how that announcement of that new Zelda was covered back in the day, and I could share a little behind the scenes story about that. So we're sort of keeping in the spirit of behind the stories. Last week, I gave you one about the behind the scenes of how I got an Xbox Scoop. This is behind the scenes of an E3 2019 reveal of the game that would come to be known as The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. So the reason I'm even talking about this is because I saw an article on Kotaku earlier today that itself was writing up a new edition, a new episode of the Kit and Krysta podcast. Kit Ellis and Krista Yang are former longtime Nintendo employees. They'd worked in marketing and comms, and they have a really great show where they talk a lot about the present and future of Nintendo, but also their own experiences in the past, some of the adventures they had. And they made a video about the biggest secrets we had to keep while we were at Nintendo. And Kit Ellis talks about being one of fewer than 10 people who was told in advance of E3 2019 that Nintendo was going to reveal that the sequel to the great Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was in development for the Switch. And this was going to be Nintendo's big announcement of the show. And they decided, I guess, to keep it secret from even most of the people who worked in Nintendo of America, I guess to minimize leaks, maybe maximize the excitement around it. And when I saw that Kit was talking about this, and I didn't really know how secretive it was within Nintendo itself, I thought, oh, I think I have something to add to that because, again, as a member of the press, I covered that, and Nintendo kept it very secret in a very unusual way from the press as well. And so that's the kind of perspective that I wanted to share. So a little bit of setup here on this one. Nintendo, in terms of how it's structured, Nintendo is headquartered in Japan. HQ is in Kyoto. The preponderance of game development happens in Kyoto. They have a big studio in Tokyo as well. They make games elsewhere around the world. They have other studios, but that's where most of it happens. Nintendo of America is more of that team is more focused on marketing and legal and localization of games, customer service, not so much the development of games. And so the dynamic of an E3, where Nintendo is going to be showing off their biggest games, is one where the team in Japan is coming to the United States, coordinating with Nintendo of America in some shape or form to then put on this showcase. For those who don't know E3 itself, that was the biggest showcase moment of the year on the gaming calendar, typically in June, typically happening in Los Angeles. A lot of it involving the biggest game companies in the world all taking out booth space in the cavernous Los Angeles Convention Center. And you would go from like Tuesday to Friday, if you remember the press or somebody in the industry or you managed to sneak in, and you would be able to go to kiosks that were playing the big games that were announced or see trailers, if you remember the press, do interviews with folks who were in town to promote, executives and game developers to promote all of these games that were being announced by Nintendo, by PlayStation, by Sega, by you name it. And so it was always a big deal what companies would announce, and the big first parties, including Nintendo, would announce their stuff via these big, initially on stage and then later pre-recorded showcase events. The Nintendo one typically would go last. So you would have, maybe starting on Saturday or Sunday, going into E3 week, you would have Sony PlayStation, you would have Microsoft's Xbox showcase, you might have one from EA or Square Enix. I remember one back in the day, there's a notorious one from Konami that was quite entertaining to attend. Nintendo would typically go last, and they would typically run their presentation on Tuesday morning, right before the Los Angeles Convention Center would open up and people could go in. So what Kit Ellis talks about in the Kit and Krysta show, the episode that aired a few days ago, regarding the secrets, was about how he, leading into this, was one of fewer than 10 people who was told, we're going to end our Nintendo showcase with a video teaser for The Legend of Zelda. Well, at the time, it was the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. They either didn't know or weren't ready to announce it as Tears of the Kingdom. And so I didn't know that it was that secret inside Nintendo. And I found that interesting, and it's their podcast is well worth a listen and a watch, and I'll link to it so you can kind of check out that part of the story. He explains how the folks in Japan wanted to keep it very secret. They told very few people. The head of Nintendo of America, Doug Bowser, at the time, Kit says was aware, but he says there were a lot of people even above him in his job, above Kit, not above Doug, but above Kit, who weren't privy to it. But Kit had been selected to be aware of it, to prepare, language to write in a press release and what have you. And he said the initial drafts of all of the marketing materials around E3 did not include any mention of this Breath of the Wild sequel. Okay, so the press end of it. What was my experience of this whole thing? Typically, when Nintendo was moved into the phase of Nintendo Directs, when they were no longer doing the on-stage live show with Reggie Fils-Aimé or some other executive out there at E3 talking about what Nintendo was doing, and they shifted to doing it all as a pre-recorded video. Typically, they would invite select members of the press to screen the Nintendo Direct early. We'd sign an NDA, and you'd sign your life away that you're not going to leak anything. And so the chronology of this is that on Sunday, June 9th of 2019, under an NDA, I went and I saw the pre-E3 showing of what anybody else would have been able to eventually see as the Nintendo Direct. Except the version I saw did not end with a Zelda reveal. It ended before that. If you watch the real thing, just cut off the Zelda part, and that's how you'll see that'll be the version that I saw. It ends with an announcement that Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is going to include, amazingly, the return to Nintendo platforms of Banjo-Kazooie. They are characters that are going to be in Smash. It was kind of a big deal. It was plausibly the final big announcement, and there was already a lot of other games that were showcased. There were updates to the then forthcoming Luigi's Mansion 3, Pokemon Sword and Shield, Animal Crossing New Horizon I think the delay was announced. They were showing more of the Switch remake of the great Game Boy Zelda game Link's Awakening. But there was also this kind of fun thing at the end. Hey, we got Banjo-Kazooie back. They're not, they're guest returning. Nintendo didn't reacquire the characters. But Rare, which made Banjo-Kazooie, had been owned by Microsoft for quite some time at this point, and for Banjo-Kazooie to be showing up in Smash Brothers was pretty fun. And again, was plausibly the final announcement for that E3 showcase. So I went to that thinking, okay, that's what they're doing. And that was Saturday. No, that was what was that? It was Sunday, June 9th. And then on Monday, June 10th, I was sent materials by Nintendo to be like, we'll help, and this was common. This would happen all the time. Here's the press release under embargo. Here's some assets, screenshots, or whatever under embargo. And believe me, this was super helpful because Nintendo going last every E3 kind of announcement cycle, and then going on the morning of the show, where then the doors of the LA Convention Center were going to open up. It was kind of a crunch to be able to get to covering all of Nintendo stuff. And if you didn't know what was coming, it was very hard to pivot from covering the events there to then being on the show floor. So I was running Kotaku at the time, and I was able to get my team ready. Here's what I know that we can pre-write and we can have ready to go. So you get the press release early. And I checked. The press release is like a file name included. It was like E3 2019 _ final. So all indications was that what I saw, and this had been the case every other year, what I saw was actually going to be what then aired. So I was pretty surprised when I was sitting down watching the Nintendo Direct from my hotel room. I think then news editor, maybe at the time, Jason Schreier was with me, and we were both in whatever hotel we were, a bunch of us from Kotaku might have been staying at, and we were like watching it, and I'm EIC, so I'm making sure people are covering what they need to be covering. And I remember Jason's like, oh, we should get out to the convention center. I'm going to head out because it's time to get into that mode of things. The announcement part is over. It's time to get onto the show floor. And he's like walking out of the room, and I'm like, oh my God, wait. Banjo-Kazooie wasn't the end, because it's like the one more thing is suddenly happening, and like this music is playing. You're like, what is this? And you very quickly realize it's got a Zelda-y vibe, and I'm like, Jason, you got to come back here. They had not told us. They had shown us basically a trick version of the Nintendo showcase, and there it was. When the surprise they'd kept even from the press, who thought they were seeing the whole thing. I double-checked the press release that Nintendo had put out at the time that they'd sent, and they very clearly, and now knowing what Kit had shared, you can sort of see how this was done. The top of the press release does not mention that they're teasing the new Zelda. The first couple of paragraphs don't mention it, but then there is a paragraph about how they say Nintendo also revealed 2 new paid downloadable fighters coming to the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate game, Hero from the Dragon Quest series, to be available this summer, and Banjo-Kazooie for this fall. And then there's a new sentence that wasn't in the original version that I had been sent that says the Nintendo Direct presentation concluded with the reveal of the secret to the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is currently in development for Nintendo Switch. And so now we know that Kit Ellis had that sentence ready to drop into the press release. Wasn't the version that I was sent early, the final version, because apparently there's something after final. And so that was, an unusual thing for Nintendo to do. It was a little bit like, hey, wait, I thought I was getting the final version, but I also totally understood it. It was their biggest announcement. It's their prerogative if they wanted to just cut things off one beat early. It's just kind of funny in retrospect. I remember thinking about like, was that as plausible as I thought? The Banjo Kazooie was their show ender. It made so much more sense when they were like, no, the show ender is actually that we have the next Zelda coming. So that's how that all went down. And you never know, I guess, in the future when the press thinks they know everything, when they think the companies have leveled with them, there may still be a surprise twist to come. So that's the behind the story for that story. And maybe I'll be back with another one this week, or if not, we'll see. But let me know what you think. I appreciated the feedback on the first one. Appreciate any feedback you have for me on this one as well. Until next time, take care.